Question back there, and then we'll close it up.
Christians have said that for various reasons the Mashiach had to come during the time of the Second Temple period. What are they talking about, and what is the truth?
I'm pretty sure I know what they're saying, and that is what they're saying is based on, this is a little elaborate, but I'm pretty sure, does Daniel 9 sound familiar? Daniel chapter 9, Daniel is standing in the first year of Darius the Mede, and he begins to weep. And he's weeping over the prophecies of Jeremiah, and he says, I just don't understand them. And he's terrified. He's absolutely petrified. And it goes on with a chapter where he begins to pray to God because he doesn't understand what's happening. What's bothering Daniel in chapter 9? It's very critical that Daniel tells us this took place in the first year of Darius. Actually, it's the only year of Darius the Mede, because Darius the Mede, which means the end of the Babylonian Empire, and essentially the beginning of the Persian Empire. There's a small interlude with Darius the Mede, who we got a lot about in Daniel chapter 6. Daniel is absolutely petrified. He prays, and the angel Gabriel is sent to give him an answer. And that answer you'll find in Daniel chapter 29, chapter verses 23 through 27. And what Christians will say is if you look precisely at this time period, it tells us exactly when Jesus would die on the cross. Interestingly, I'll just point out, you will not find this anywhere in the Christian Bible. This is going to offend the Christians in the room. This is a later Christian invention. You'll understand why. What was Daniel's conundrum? He was looking at two passages in Jeremiah. One of them, if you're writing it down, this would be a good time to pick up your pen, is in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 12, and the second is in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. I'll repeat that again. Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 12, and Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. These two passages look almost identical because they all speak of 70 years and they all speak about Babylon. And Daniel conflated those two 70-year periods because they seem very similar. And Daniel is going, oh my God, what was Daniel's problem? And this is what Christians don't know. They don't know what Daniel was worried about. 18 years before the destruction of the first temple, Babylon subjugated Yerushalayim, which means Jerusalem had lost all autonomy. Daniel therefore presumed that when you start the clock ticking for Jerusalem, for the Jews to return back to their land, and that's what you'll find in 29 verse 10, not in 25 verse 12, he presumed they're the same thing. So therefore, if in fact Babylon has come to an end, has been destroyed, and that's the prophecy in Jeremiah 25 verse 12, then okay, one part of this has happened. Babylon just gone. The Persian Empire has now begun. But the other part of the prophecy, only found in Jeremiah 29:10, just did not occur. The Jews are not returning. And he collapses to the ground. And he's going, this is horrible. And that's what you're going to read in Daniel chapter 9. What is Daniel's horror? He says that the curse of the law has come upon us. In Leviticus chapter 26, we have the teichecha, which means the blessings and the curse. And it says in this passage that the Jewish people continue to sin, I will multiply your punishment 7 times. That's what the text says. And Daniel's thinking is the following, because he's saying, I don't understand. Jeremiah's calculation is, oh my God, instead of a 70-year exile where we can't return to land, it's 70 times 7, which we know is 490, Rabbeinu Shalom, and he begins a confessional prayer. It's so beautiful, if you'll notice, that Gabriel was going to go down to Daniel, give him the answer, but Hashem loved Daniel so much, he's called beloved. That's what he's called. And Hashem held on to Gabriel, and he says, wait, we'll give him the answer, but let me just listen to him finish. It's really quite exquisite. It's like, it's very beautiful. So Gabriel finally now is going to break down a period of 490 years from the going forth of the word. This is a little tricky, but I'll move through it, and you can study it, I'll do it with you. But the word devar, which means the word of prophecy, from the time that you start counting, is not from the subjugation of Jerusalem, which would have been 18 years before the destruction of Jerusalem, but the words are lechorvot Yerushalayim, from the destruction of Jerusalem. That is from the going forth of the word. And therefore he breaks 490 years into a different series of times. One part happens, by the way, they're called 70 weeks. The word week is employed here because of Leviticus 25, the end of 2nd Chronicles, the last chapter, tells us the reason why there was a 70-year exile is because the Jews had abandoned the land, had abandoned the law of Shemitah. So he's using the Shemitah language, okay? So 70 weeks means 70 weeks of years, which means 490 years. So here is the prophecy. From the going forth of the word, from Lechorvot Yerushalayim, you'll find this in verse 2 already, until a Mashiach Nogid, an anointed prince, will be for 7 weeks, which means 49 years. And what does that anointed, paraphrasing him, what does that anointed prince do? He gives the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now the question, and by the way, the word there is Mashiach Nogid. Mashiach Nogid. Who is the Mashiach, who's also a prince? Nogid is still a Hebrew word today in modern Hebrew, means Mashiach. No. Who is a person who is a person of royalty and is the Mashiach, and what he does specifically is give the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem? We know one person in the Bible that we're told does that. You'll find that in the book of Isaiah, in chapter 45, verse 1, and that's Cyrus. In fact, you should back up one verse to 44:28. The chapter breaks are artificial. They were invented by the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 13th century, so we don't pay any attention to that. But Cyrus specifically is called my Mashiach, my anointed one. And what is his job? To give the command to rebuild Jerusalem. In fact, the book of Ezra, that the church will remove from after Daniel, as it should be, strip it somewhere else, because if you finish Daniel chapter 12 and then you opened up Ezra chapter 1, you would find Cyrus right there. So the church said, let's bury Ezra chapter. No, Ezra is called Ezra, but we're not going to be introduced to the person named Ezra until the 7th chapter. And Ezra says what in chapter 1? Ezra tells us that Cyrus is giving the command, you go back to Jerusalem, you Judeans, to do what? To fulfill the word, devar of Yirmiyahu. And we find that exact same language at the end of 2nd Chronicles. So what's happened then is, it says, for another 62 weeks, he's going to break, the angel's breaking it down. For 62 weeks, which means 434 years, just do your multiplication, the city will be rebuilt, street and in moat. However, be'ez sarah, in troublous times, in very difficult times. And then what happens, we're now left with the last week. What happens in the last week? We're now brought to a period where the temple is about to be destroyed. The sanctuary is going to be destroyed, and we're going to back up 7 years before the destruction of the temple, when the sacrificial system and the priesthood is going to be cut off. And we have again the word Mashiach, but this Mashiach is a different person. Therefore, he's not a nugget. He's going to be cut off. He's going to be removed. Where in 3.5 years, meaning in a half a week, before the end, which means in the year 66. Well, what happens here in the land of Israel in the year 66 to the sanctuary? What happens between Rome and the Jewish people in the year 66 CE? The Jews go to war against Rome. And what happens then? The sanctuary, we can no longer bring sacrifices. The priesthood comes to halt and stop and is destroyed. Now, If Christians want to claim that the anointed one who is cut off, yikares ve'enlo, but it's not for himself, means heaven for a much larger point. If they're going to claim that that's speaking about Jesus, they've got a huge monumental problem. Why? Because the point that the anointed one is cut off is 3.5 years before the end of the 490 years. Incidentally, how long did the second temple stand? 420 years. How long was the Babylonian exile? 70 years. Bingo, there's your 490 years. So in 66, suddenly the sanctuary, and we have, the Talmud discusses extensively what goes on. We don't need to go into it now. So 3.5 years before the destruction of the temple, which is 66, suddenly karbonos can be brought, and now even the Sadducees can't pull it off, who are in cahoots with Rome, and the whole anointed. The word Mashiach, incidentally, appears 38 times in the Jewish scriptures. It is never referring to the Messiah. It appears more frequently in the book of Leviticus, speaking of priests, right, than speaking about anybody else. So the anointed one is cut off. Now, that takes place in 66. Now, there's a little problem for Christianity, because if they want to assign that cutting off to Jesus, they're claiming that the crucifixion took place in the year 30. They're off by 5.5 weeks. So it doesn't work. The second thing they do is even more horrendous, and that is they conflate the two. You see, what the text actually says, from the going forth of the word till an anointed one, a Messiah, not the Messiah, as many Christian Bibles will put there. They'll make it to HaMashiach. It just says Mashiach Nogid, is 7 weeks, and then it says then for 62 weeks. But they should be separated completely, because you never say 69 by saying 7, 2, and 60. That's not in any language. Not only Hebrew we would say Shishim V'Tesha. In Hebrew we would say Soixante Neuf. In Yiddish we would say 69, and so on and so forth. So they compress it. Why are they compressing the period of 7 with 62? They've got good reason to do it. They're trying to get rid of 2 anointed ones. They want to have 1 anointed one who comes at the end. It doesn't work out. It will not measure for them. It won't, because they're so off. Some Christians, I should say, because full disclosure, really have no idea what to do with that last week. And many Christian denominations will say the last week simply hasn't happened, and it's being removed, and that last week is not in the future. What you would find very interesting, incidentally, is that the King James Version was revised, major revisions with 5 revisions. 1611 we're not looking at a King James 1611, but if you look at the 1611 King James, which you can find in any library, you'll see there's a semicolon there, which would indicate that after 7 weeks it's a stop, and then for 62 weeks. And obviously it doesn't, why would you say 7, 2, and 60? And how do you know, if you look at today's King James, they've conflated the two. Which change made that? Who did it? It's like the who done it. And when did you do it, like Vietnam? The year was 1885 when that was conflated together. So if you go through all the King James, it's in 1885 that those two periods are conflated in order to produce one Messiah, because they've just got to get rid of that there are 2 anointed ones that are speaking here. What Christian Bibles further do is they take the word Messiah. There are no capital letters in the Hebrew language, and they make capital M, and then it says Mashiach Nogid, which means an anointed prince, and they translate it as the Messiah. So again, this goes back to what I said earlier, without the access to the original, because there's a lot of Aramaic in Daniel, but Daniel 9 is in Hebrew. They can see it from themselves, they would know it themselves. If you email to me just anything, I will send you a much more elaborate lecture on this text, and I'll send you a chart that will bring this through. The last point I want to make is this, which is very important for Christians to consider. The angel says that following this period of time, 6 things are going to happen, including the fulfillment of all prophecy, the end of sin. There will be no more transgression. If, in fact, Jesus fulfilled these texts, if this is in fact, let me rephrase that, if this is in fact a description of what the Messiah is supposed to accomplish, Jesus failed miserably. Sin didn't end. Prophecy has not been fulfilled. So it's very, very clear that the Christian understanding, or the way these texts are taught, is awful. Does the average Christian know what I've just said to you? They have no idea. Are they bad people because they have no idea? No. Just no one taught them. They never thought to look at Isaiah 45:1, where God says, Cyrus is my Mashiach. Who gives the command to rebuild Jerusalem? There's your answer to your question.